May it please the court, my name is Bernice Hernane, along with my co-counsel, Julia Lee.
Discuss the role of the Stamp Act played in the relationship between Great Britain and the colonies from 1765 to 1772.
The Stamp Act was a law passed by the British Parliament that required colonists to pay taxes on paper products such as cards, sheets of papers, etc., etc. And this was the first time Britain tried to raise money directly from the colonists rather than through trade. And many colonists were rightfully outraged as they had no representatives in Parliament to speak for them. And they also believed that this violated their rights, as many summed up with their anger with the phrase "no taxation without representation." And in Virginia, leaders responded with the Virginia Resolves, which declared only colonial assemblies had the right to tax people. Soon, the Continental Congress reached this idea, that stating that taxes could only be imposed by representatives chosen by the colonists themselves. And these protests showed that the colonies were beginning to unite against Great Britain's authority and the rules. And the Stamp Act became the first major conflict between Great Britain and the colonies, as Parliament eventually repealed the law, which proved that British could also be pressured to back down and be reasoned with. However, the repeal did not end the tension between Great Britain and the colonies, but rather it encouraged the colonies to keep fighting for their rights, liberty, and freedom. And the short conflict caused by the Stamp Act laid the foundation for the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness.
Discuss how the colonies and the particular of the Committee of Correspondence responded to the TF Act revolution. I don't know how to do that. Can we restart?
Yeah, I'll edit this out.
Discuss how the colonies and the particular
And
in particular the
Okay, discuss how the colonies and in particular the Committee of Correspondence. Yeah.
Okay. Are you gonna edit this out?
Yes.
Okay. Discuss how the colonies and in particular the Committee of Correspondence responded to the Tea Act Revolution of 1773.
When the British Parliament passed the Tea Act, it felt a lot like the Stamp Act all over again, as the law taxed tea specifically rather than paper, which was passed without the colonists saying anything, which made people furious, which made the colonists mad because they were deprived of their representation. And to them, this wasn't just about tea. It was specifically being controlled by Great Britain, specifically Britain's Parliament. And many colonists saw that the Tea Act was another way for Parliament to suppress their freedom and to gain control of the colonists. Furthermore, should I restart the question? It's okay. Furthermore, the Boston Committee of Correspondence called the Tea Act a tyrannical act, which specifically means that Britain was acting like a dictator, like a tyrant. And in Philadelphia, the colonists responded with the Philadelphia Resolution, which specifically made their anger clear. As they said in the Tea Act, which was passed without their consent, and if they don't resist Britain's control, they would become enslaved to Britain's authority. And they also warned that giving the East Indian Company control over tea sales would destroy free trade, and that buying taxed tea, which they argued, only helped Britain take away colonial rights. And the resolution also encouraged colonists to unite and fight back. And this resistance spread all over other colonies and inspired resistance, and which leads to the Boston Tea Party, which is the most famous resistance, where the colonies dumped British tea into the harbor to show that they would not be in control.
Discuss how the colonies responded to the Intolerable Act of 1774, the Boston Port Act, the Massachusetts Government Act, and the Quartering Act.
The Intolerable Acts were a set of law that was passed by the British Parliament. And it was a way to punish the colonies because of the Boston Tea Party, and they specifically punished specifically Massachusetts after as I said before, the Boston Tea Party. And the laws included the Boston Port Act, Massachusetts Government Act, and the Quartering Act. The Boston Port Act shut down Boston Harbor completely, which prevented ships from coming in or out. And this destroyed Boston's economy, as trade was basically impossible, which means that they weren't able to profit from any trade. And the Massachusetts Government Act took away the colonists' ability to govern themselves, as the colonies could no longer elect many of the governmental officials, which made the royal governor, which was chosen by Britain, the most powerful. Finally, the Quartering Act forced colonists to house British soldiers and even provide their living expenses. And instead of scaring the colonists into obedience, the Intolerable Acts united them together. And colonists realized that if Britain could do this to Boston, then it could happen anywhere. The Continental Congress also responded with the Declaration and Resolves, which included a list of grievances and a Bill of Rights. The grievances complained about the unfair taxes, restriction on trade, the shutting down of colonial assemblies, and Britain making decisions without the approval of the colonies. And the Bill of Rights declared that the colonies deserved the same rights as the British citizens, including the right to be taxed only by their elected representative, and the right to assemble and petition, and the right to freely trade. The Intolerable Acts backfired, and instead of weakening the colonies, they further strengthened their unity and even pushed them closer to their own independence. The colonies also began to see themselves as not just a subject, but rather as people and individuals who have their own rights and liberty and futures.
Discuss how the actions of the Continental Congress in 1774 moved the colonies towards declaring independence.
The Continental Congress in 1774 played a massive role in pushing the colonies closer to declaring their independence, as the as people meet in Philadelphia because they were fed up with how the British Parliament kept taking away their rights with acts. The Intolerable Acts was their breaking point, as the laws took away their as the laws closed down Boston ports and restricted self-government and forced colonists to house British soldiers. And to the colonists, this felt like their freedoms were being stripped away by Great Britain, and they had no representation in Parliament. But Britain kept taxing them, passing laws and limiting trade. Many writers and leaders helped shape the growing resistance against Great Britain. A great example of this is Thomas Jefferson's pamphlet, A Summary View of the Rights of British America, which argued that the colonies were equal to Britain and not just inferior compared to Great Britain. This idea of equality further gave the colonies the confidence that they deserved the same right as British citizens. And the circular letter of the Boston Committee of Correspondence spread Boston's message across the colonies, which warned that Britain's actions threatened everyone. And the letter helped unite the colonies and further led to the First Continental Congress. And at that meeting, the Congress issued the Declaration and Resolves, which listed colonial grievances and outlined basic rights. They also declared that only elected representatives could impose taxes and that colonies had the right to assemble and petition, and that trade should be free. These actions showed unity and determination. Even though independence wasn't even declared yet, this set the groundwork. The colonies were no longer simply just complaining, but they were organizing, cooperating, and preparing to stand together for their freedom and rights against Great Britain.
Describe the arguments advanced by patriots and pamphlets, speeches, and other writings from 1774 to 1776 that supported declaring independence.
One of the strongest arguments that was made by the patriots came from Thomas Jefferson, A Summary View of the Rights of British America, which Jefferson explained that colonies were not supposed to be above or below Great Britain, but also unequal. He also argued that the Parliament had no right and authority over the colonies because they had their own assemblies and that the governments. And this idea of equality was powerful because it gave colonists the confidence and the confidence that they deserve the same right as the British people. Another famous argument came from Patrick Henry's speech, "Give me liberty or give me death." This is a speech by Henry, which was telling the Virginia Convention that waiting for Britain to change was dangerous, as the colonies have already tried to petition, protest, and negotiate, but Britain ignored them. And he further believed that freedom requires action, that freedom requires immediate action, even if that meant war. His famous line from this speech was, "Give me liberty or give me death," further shows that he would rather die than live under tyrannical rule. Finally, the pamphlet of the pamphlet Tyrant Unmasked, responsible to Samuel Johnson's essay Taxation No Tyrant, defended the colony's right to resist unfair taxes and laws. The um the author really argued that the colonies had no representation in the British Parliament and that Britain was heavily abusing its power, and natural rights like liberty and property could not be taken away from the colonists. And together, all these writings and speeches show inspired many colonists to unite and move closer to declaring their
Okay.
describe the argument advanced by loyalists in the pamphlet, speeches, and other writings from 1774 to 1776 that opposed declaring independence.
By 1774, many American colonists were tired of how Britain was treating them. Harsh laws like the Boston Port Act and the Quartering Act punished Boston and took away basic rights. Still, most people weren't ready to completely break away. They just wanted to be treated fairly. Documents like the Declaration and Resolves and the Continental Association show that the colonies were united, but they still hoped the king would listen. In 1775, that hope was still alive. The Olive Branch petition asked the king for peace, and the British leaders like Edmund Burke wanted to fix things. Loyalists like the Governor William Franklin and Samuel Johnson defended British rule. Even critics like the author of Tyranny Unmarked weren't calling for full independence yet. But things started to change. Patrick Henry's famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech showed that some colonies were ready to fight. Then in 1776, Thomas Paine's Common Sense made a strong case for independence and inspired a lot of people. Colonies like North Carolina and Virginia officially supported breaking away. After lots of debate, the Continental Congress voted for independence on July 2nd and approved the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. That's when the colonies fully chose to become their own country.
Discussed the Continental Congress's efforts of reconciliation with Great Britain in 1775.
In 1775, the Continental Congress was still trying to avoid war with Great Britain. They didn't want independence yet. They just wanted to be treated fairly. In July, they sent the Olive Branch petition to King George III, asking for peace and promising they were still loyal. At the time, they wrote the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of taking up arms, saying that they were ready to fight if needed, but only to defend themselves, not to start a revolution. Some British leaders like Edmund Burke gave speeches telling Parliament to listen to the colonies and make peace. But others like Samuel Johnson were harsh, saying the colonies had no right to complain. Then on August, the king rejected the Olive Branch petition and called the colonies rebellious in his proclamation for suppressing rebellion and sedition. After that, Congress began making secret plans and giving orders to prepare for war. Writing like Tyranny Unmasked defended the colonies and argued back against Britain. Even though Congress had tried to keep the peace, Britain's refusal and the growing anger in the colonies made war seem almost certain. By the end of 1775, it was clear that the reconciliation had failed, and independence was starting to look like the only option.
Discussed the deliberation of the Continental Congress in June and July 1776 that led to declaring independence.
In June and July of 1776, the Continental Congress had big decisions to make whether or not they officially break away from Britain. Earlier that year, Thomas Paine's Common Sense convinced many colonists that independence was the right move. Not everyone agreed. James Tersmer Plantruth argued that the independence would lead to chaos and failure. As more colonies started supporting the idea, places like North Carolina and Virginia paused resolution calling for independence. On July 7, Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution in Congress to declare the colonies free. Some delegates weren't ready yet, so Congress decided to wait and form a committee to write a declaration. Thomas Jefferson wrote the first draft and help from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. Throughout June, Congress received instructions from colonies like Pennsylvania, and leaders like John Adams kept pushing for independence. On July 1st, the debates heated up. John Nicholson spoke against independence, while Adams defended it. Adams even wrote to Samuel Chase saying that the vote was close but looking good. Finally, on July 2nd, Congress voted for independence. 2 days later, on July 4th, they approved the final Declaration of Independence. After weeks of debate and writing, the colonies made one of the most important decisions in American history, choosing to become a new nation.
Discuss how the text of the Declaration of Independence changed throughout different drafts in June and July of 1776.
In June and July of 1776, the Declaration of Independence went through many changes as the Continental Congress tried to agree on what message they wanted to send to the world. On June 7, Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution saying that colonies should be free from British rule. After that, Congress picked a small group to write a formal declaration. Thomas Jefferson wrote the first draft, which helped from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. Jefferson's original draft was bold and direct. He blamed King George III for slavery and criticized the British people for not helping the colonies. But when Congress read it, they made edits. They removed the part about slavery so southern colonies wouldn't be upset, and they softened some of the harsher language so all 13 colonies could agree. Other writings at the time also influenced the Declaration. Thomas Paine's common sense encouraged people to support independence, while James Sherman Plantruth warned it would cause problems. Colonies like Virginia and North Carolina already called for independence, and John Adams' diary shows how hard he worked to get the Declaration passed. On July 4th, Congress had agreed on a final version. It kept Jefferson's main ideas but included the changes needed to unite all the colonies.
Discuss writings, speeches, and other sources that influenced the Declaration of Independence.
The Declaration of Independence didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was resulted of years of frustration, protests, and big ideas. One of the biggest influences was John Locke's Second Treatise of Government from 1690. Locke believed that people had natural rights like life, liberty, and property. And if the government abused those rights, the people can change it. Jefferson used this idea clearly in his writing. In the 1760s and 1770s, the colony faced unfair British laws like the Stamp Act and Tea Act, which made them feel controlled and ignored. Colonists fought back with protests and resolutions like Patrick Henry's Virginia Resolves and the Stamp Act Congress, saying they should govern themselves. Writers such as John Dickinson and Samuel Adams spread these ideas and encouraged unity. Things got worse with events like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party. Britain answered with harsh laws like the Boston Port Act and the Quartering Act, which made many colonists even angrier. By 1774, documents like Jefferson's Summer Review and the Fairfax Resolves were openly challenging British rule. And finally, in 1776, Thomas Paine's common sense gave colonists a strong emotional push towards independence. All these protests, speeches, and writing came together to shape the Declaration into a bold message of freedom.